Hi, and welcome. If the panel would like to come up, we've got 4 experts from the business jet market, 2 of whom also are involved in yachts, and 2 who are pure play. On my far left, we have Paul Jebley from Stirlington. Paul's an aircraft lawyer based in North America and Hong Kong, tends to advise jet buyers. Next to him, we have James Jaffa, who needs no introduction if anyone was here last year. Bob, I don't know if you're in the room at the moment, but now's your chance.
That was an event for all of us.
And then we have Stefan Roell from UBS. UBS obviously is very active in both yachts and jets, finance. And on my closest to me, we have Steve Varsano from the jet business. If you have children, they will be very excited. If they have children who are on TikTok, they will be very excited that Steve Varsano is here. Steve, what's how many people have watched your biggest? 1.5 billion people have viewed Steve selling a jet to a young girl who wanted to buy it for her father, I think. That's right, isn't it?
There was one like that, yeah.
There was one like that. So yeah, Steve it's great to have a proper influencer on stage. Steve, let's start. You've been selling jets for a long time. Not that you can tell, because Steve is also hugely into longevity, if anyone wants to discuss that. Steve, you've been selling jets for a long time. What's the state of the market? And let's just focus on large aircraft for this audience.
Yeah, we only focus on the super mids up to the ultra long range airplanes, so that's the only market we really focus on. But for sure, that market is super, super strong right now. In fact, if you want any airplane less than 5 years old, you really have a tough time finding anything available for sale. So prices are actually not just gone flat, but they've actually started to inch back up a little bit in some of the airplanes that are really hard to find. So anything that, let's say, the newer G650 or G700, which is impossible, a Global 6500, 7500s, Falcon 6Xs, any of those airplanes, they're just really impossible to get a hold of. And that really happened in the last 6 months. Everything turned around and the market just dried up.
And that's partly because of accelerated depreciation or bonus depreciation.
Well, we thought that was the case, and because usually January drops down, but January actually just carried on, and the demand was there, and an airplane comes for sale, and there's 2 or 3 buyers, boom, right there. I mean, we were trying to buy a 5-year-old airplane 3-4 weeks ago, and the guy came up with an asking price. We actually bid $250,000 more than the asking price, and 3 other bidders bid the asking price.
And to be fair, that may also be a function of the market, because bonus depreciation is obviously continuing for the foreseeable future during the Trump administration, which obviously also now has some impact on yachts.
But it's also only, it's 50-60% of the market, because there's 40% of the market that's not affected by that.
I think that feeds in nicely, though, on pricing, which Steve's best placed to answer on, because for me, one of the big differences between yachts and jets is the pricing and the value is much more predictable, because there are a very small number of manufacturers and a small number of models within those manufacturers, and then a very small number of interiors you can choose, and a high number of assets. You end up with a market that's very price-driven. It's very rare that you sit on an asset trying to sell it for 12 months, 24 months. If you price it right, it sells. And I think it's a question to Steve, but you can predict much more carefully how much you'll get for your aircraft in 3 months' time. 3 years' time. But something different is happening now then if you're seeing prices spike.
Yeah, there's no question. Compared to the yacht market, which I just know as a passenger, there's far fewer manufacturers and OEMs, so there's less choices, and each manufacturer actually has an exact layout. So there's very little you could do in the corporate jets. So literally, if anybody wants to sell an airplane, I can ask them 5 questions, and I could probably give them a price in 2 minutes within 3 or 4% of what he could sell that airplane for. And the market's super efficient, and it really, there's not many variables in it.
And everything, I think, is much more structured than yachting. So we do a 50-50% split of each, and we're a law firm, for those who don't know. So we do a 50-50 split, and everything about aircraft is much more structured than yachts. So if we stick on the theme of pricing, you go through the survey, your surveyor finds issues. The seller might agree to a partial price reduction, the seller might repair some items, you shake hands, you pat on the back, you agree a price, you buy the yacht, you go yachting, everything's happy. I think it's very, very different in jets, where everything is much more structured, price-driven. Whether or not you can buy it is dictated by the manufacturer or the maintenance facility after the inspection. Everything is much more structured and less of a trading game. I say, as I probably look at Steve before I offend him, because Steve probably loves to trade as much as anybody, but it's less emotional, and it feeds into everything. I'm looking at Al, because I don't know if I'm allowed to go into all this, but I think, am I? So, if you get away from pricing, unlike yachts, where you sign a contract, you do a survey, and you have that scenario I just described where you reach a gentlemanly outcome most of the time. With aircraft, you sign the contract, you go for an inspection, which is the equivalent of the survey, and that inspection facility is either the manufacturer or a manufacturer-approved facility, and they dictate whether or not the aircraft passes the inspection and then returns to service and then can be sold. And it's just everything is more regulated, and I think that's something that the yacht industry could learn from, because it gives the buyers much more satisfaction, because they know that when they go in to buy an aircraft, if the maintenance facility releases it back after the survey inspection, they're going to get a perfect aircraft and go flying. From a seller's perspective, they're much less happy, because once it goes into the inspection, they have no option but to repair it and make the changes.
I think you're 100% right in principle.
But that's a really polite way of saying but.
But Stefan, you have clients who are buying aircraft, and it goes in for the pre-purchase inspection, the equivalent of the survey, and the maintenance facility, which is also regulated by the FAA or the national authority for that aircraft, will go, you need to replace that part. And then the buyer finds out they're going to have to wait 6 months for that part. You're seeing that with your customers, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's then a question of, is it under control, right? Is there a timeline to fix the issues? But this is both on the yachts or on the jets in this regard, right? So there it's more about, is it being taken care of, and do we have control of making sure that it is as good as it's supposed to be, right?
Steve, in your 30 plus years of selling aircraft, would you say deals are taking longer now than ever before?
Yeah, there's no question about it, for a number of reasons. One is airplanes are just getting older in general, and when the airplane goes in for a pre-purchase inspection, the magic word, of course, is corrosion. So it doesn't matter if it's even surface corrosion. Everybody, raise their arms up, oh my God, and it's just another line item of profit for the service centers. And then you have supply chain issues with some of the parts, because as the airplanes are getting older, so the problem is that some of the parts are not available. Like today, I don't know, again on boats, but on airplanes, to try to find a windshield, is almost impossible on airplanes. If you want to do a bar scope on an engine, if you go inside the engine, there's probably more of a chance they're going to do more damage going in looking if there's a problem than actually was there. So we're trying to get away from those kind of things. So we're trying to find ways to actually, circumvent some of the issues that will cause delays, and because we're trying to get back to the normality, if there's such a word.
And that's one of the key differences, I think, between yachts and jets. So say you're an aircraft owner, you've got your new shiny Gulfstream G800, Global 8000, whatever it is, coming in 3 months, and you think, I'll give my aircraft to Steve to sell. Steve will find a buyer that morning, obviously. And it goes in for an inspection, and let's use round figures. You agree a price of 10 million. With a yacht, you've agreed 10 million, you do a survey. If the boat fails the survey and the deal falls apart, the owner's still got his yacht, and they go yachting again, and they enjoy it, and okay, they didn't get the money, they didn't sell the asset. The difference with aircraft is, if it fails the inspection, you can't get your aircraft back and just go flying again, because the maintenance facility that's done the inspection won't release it back to service. So as a seller, it's an expensive business to sell an aircraft because you go and you do the inspection. You find some damage to the engines, corrosion, as Steve said, and it might cost you $1 million to repair it. And you can't go flying again in your own aircraft or sell it until that has been repaired at your expense, the sellers. And then within that period as well, there'll be a drop-dead clause in the contract. So if you're waiting for a windshield for 6 months and the contract drops dead after 3 months, as a seller, you've agreed 10 million. You think, great, sold the plane, got my new one coming in 3 months, perfect. Actually, you go and you do the inspection. Your buyer falls away because you reached the drop-dead date. You've spent $1 million repairing your own aircraft just to go flying. And you're pretty, it's an expensive exercise to sell an aircraft, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, but the industry's gone to, very firm, hard deals. So, as long as the seller delivers the airplane under a delivery condition at defined terms, then the buyer has to just hang in there, or they lose their deposit. Now, of course, there's a period of how long they hang in there. The normal is probably 60 days or something, 90 days after the inspection's completed. So there's got to be a drop-dead date after that. But, yeah, it's true. Sometimes, you do have a problem, and then the seller gets stuck with the airplane in the shop, and the buyer walks away, and he says, you know what, I don't care if I lose my deposit, because I don't know about the yachts, but in airplanes, 5% is a normal deposit. So it is a lot of money sometimes, but in a general scheme of things, they'd rather walk away from the deposit and go find another airplane.
And obviously, in the situation both gentlemen just described, what the natural next step is in the jet market is that seller then turns around with the benefit of that maintenance having been carried out on the aircraft, and then gives it back to Steve, and Steve sells it to another willing and able buyer. And that's also a function of the comparably deeper liquidity in the private jet market, even at the highest ends with the large cabin aircraft globally than compared to yachts. And of course, I personally don't do yachts. Whenever they come my way, I try to refer them out to the good yacht firms like Hill Dix, Clyde & Co., Robert Allen, Moss. Have I missed any? Jaffa.
They're my favorites too.
And but it is to James's opening. One of his opening points is that it is a much more, I hate to say the dirty C word, commoditized market than comparable to what a lot of the men and women in this room do on a daily basis.
I think one more thing, for private jets, you have brokers to buy the jets on their own balance sheet and take it on and try to sell it again as fast as possible. For yachting, I have not heard of this before.
So actually, from your perspective as a lender, the beauty of an aircraft is that the value of an aircraft goes down in the long run. We see odd moments when it appreciates. And it can surprise us. The value of an aircraft in 2008, shot down, or 2009. But from a lender point of view, you can get rid of that aircraft relatively quickly, can't you, compared to a super yacht?
Yes. Plus, as Steve mentioned, the value is much more transparent to us, right? I mean, for jets, you have much higher volumes, you have much more experience on what's the plane actually worth. For the yachts, we work with appraisers who give us hopefully very accurate value, but there are some yachts in the market that take a lot longer than expected to sell, right? And that's also the reason why you will find much easier financing for jets than for yachts. Banks in general provide higher lending value, LTVs. For jets, you might find a deal without a personal guarantee, whereas for yacht financing in this segment, it's basically the lending value is much lower. You need to have personal recourse to the beneficial owner, and you have much fewer players in that field that would finance a 50, 60 meter plus yacht.
But also in terms of, in terms of, by way of analogy, the closest thing in my market is what some people call the bizliners, right? The Boeing business jets, the ACJs, and they are a lot more customized. And I can tell you, with probably a couple of dozen current ACJ and BBJ owners, not a single one of them at present are financed, because the availability of finance for those more, dare I say, bespoke, customizable assets with a thinner resale market is fewer and farther in between. And of course, when you talk about the finance market in jets, you can't get away from the central truth that there's far fewer players today than there were, let's say, 10 years ago. And the larger financial institutions tend to prefer and lean more heavily towards the newer larger cabin aircraft, or not necessarily the larger cabin aircraft, but certainly the newer ones, where, to these gentlemen's points, the pricing and the residual value is still much more predictable than otherwise.
I think, and part of the pricing predictability leads on to another topic that I wanted to raise, and I know we're jumping around a little bit, but one of the key differences between the two markets for us is the absence of back-to-back transactions in yachts. So in aircraft, because the prices are so predictable, and you know you will shift the stock if you need to within price tolerances, what we see a lot is on the brokerage side, there will be broking a lot of the time, but there will also be inventory purchases. So instead of broking it and taking a commission, the brokers will buy the stock and flip it very quickly. And they'll either line up the two transactions, the buy and the sell, and flip it the same day or the next day. Or if worst comes to worst and that falls through, they'll sit on the asset for 6 months. And I've long wondered whether the brokerage houses in our yachting industry could learn from that. But the unpredictability of pricing and the unpredictability of finding a purchase for a yacht is prohibitive to it. But it's really neat because what it means, this is more Steve's world than mine, but what it means is, you have a willing seller for you at a price, and you don't have to disclose your profit margin, which I think is really good and really helpful to a lot of people. So they buy it for a price and they sell it for a price, and everybody's happy.
I think one of the reasons you have that is because the jet market has many more financial institutions, and it's not that hard for a credible broker to get a warehouse facility from a bank to buy those aircraft. You'd agree, Steve, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and it's the other reason is because I really envy all you yacht brokers who get incredible commissions, because it doesn't exist in the airplane market. So the yacht brokers are, I mean, I don't know how you get away with it, but whoever organize that, if they are in this room, please come and see me. So I'd like to do that in the jet world. We can't get away with those kind of things, and we unfortunately don't have a regulated market. And a lot of the bedroom broker type of people, especially in the U.S., they work very, very cheaply. So it is a problem for us, and so sometimes that's why some of the bigger brokers will buy the inventory and resell it, because they can't make the big fees on a regular commission.
Yeah, the barrier of entry to be a jet broker is a phone, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's basically a mobile phone.
And also, just as counterintuitive as it may be, given where the narrative of this panel is going, and kind of comparing the two and the different market dynamics, the private jet market, I would say there is far greater opacity in that market. And to James's points about how transactions are done, I mean, suffice it to say, we operate in what you would generally describe as a zero trust architecture, which differs a lot from what I've understood from the room from different lawyers about how the yacht market works. We have independent escrow agents. There's a lot more control. $100 million deposit doesn't go to our brokers. I'm sure Steve would like that, as would many others, and that itself sort of leads into how a lot of these transactions are done, and opens the door to what James described as the back-to-back market, where, as you can imagine, there's upside through various means. I'll leave it at that. And the closest analogy that I've come across to that, I don't know about you, really is the art market. That's the only other place that I've seen that type of back-to-backing and galleries with independent financing.
I think I'd call it more dealing than back-to-back, because there's different connotations with back-to-back.
Nothing wrong with, fundamentally wrong with back-to-back in our industry.
Yeah, because the seller's pleased with the price they get and the buyer's pleased with the price they're paying.
Yeah,
we can call it dealing.
Yeah, undisclosed dual agency stuff is something different, but for the most, people may disagree, and that's fine. For the most part, it's become a fairly accepted part of our, Steve's about to kill me.
No, I think it's much smaller than you're making it sound to be. I think very few people do back-to-backs in our industry. Most people don't even know how. They think that it's so easy, but it really, to really mimic exactly from one side to the other and not take any risk in the middle is very, very difficult to do. And unless really, if you have a customer, a buyer, or a seller, one of the buyer or the seller really needs to know that you're doing a back-to-back. And whether it's because you're taking an airplane on trade or you're telling them you are, it's very few that you'll see that will do a back-to-back, because in the middle, the escrow agents now require you to put up the deposit. You can't use a buyer's deposit to go be a deposit to the airplane that you want to go buy. So as the broker, you're going to have to put up that deposit with the escrow agent as a buyer, and the one you're going to sell it to will put up the deposit, to escrow. So it does take away a lot of the smaller kind of guys who don't have that money to put up.
Stefan, when you're financing a business jet, you typically will require that the engines, at least, from the business jet are on a maintenance program with a manufacturer or a similar organization, because engines are hugely important to the value. You don't do that with yachts, do you?
No. With the yacht, as I said before, right, I mean, we mostly rely, first of all, if it's a new build, on obviously the quality that the shipyard delivers. We work with independent appraisers who go see the yacht and then show us any potential issues, things that need to be rectified, right? And then we also, as mentioned yesterday in the tripartite panel, we work with the managers to make sure that the yacht is operated in a correct way, right? But there is no program whatsoever that we demand from our clients to enter into.
Would you like one in yachting? Would you like it to be as, I think 95% of new large business jets are coming on engine programs.
Can you explain what an engine program is? Because I didn't know until I pitched up and started selling aircraft with clients a few years ago, just to the room, because I don't think to lots of people or maybe I'm
So
wrong,
basically you pay, they're all, well, Steve, you can do it. They're also known as power by the hour programs.
Yeah, it's an insurance program. It's sort of, if you want to call it, a debit card. So you're paying every hour you fly that airplane on a monthly basis. You get invoiced by either the engine manufacturer who has that program, or there's a third-party vendor that provides that insurance program. So basically, what happens is that if you ever have a problem before the overhaul comes due, it's paid for. And even when the overhaul comes due, it's paid for. But sometimes if, a pilot over-temperatures the engine and it has a major issue and it could cost $1 or $2 million, that program that you've been paying into every hour, it makes the engine fixed and paid for. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to have a different program that covers for a loaner engine while that engine is getting fixed. And even if you have that program to get the loaner engine, now the manufacturers don't have the engines to give you on a loaner, so you have to ground your airplane. So there's more of an issue with availability of engines than the coverage.
but in theory you pay an annual amount and all of your maintenance on your engines is covered. And the maintenance, if there's a big problem, the insurance policy pays out and covers that big invoice that you're going to get. And I don't know whether that, and this was the question to Stefan, I don't know whether that could work in yachts. Maybe not.
And just to add, the net result of that, in theory, not often in practice, is that the residual value of the aircraft would be higher on program than not. So, and I think that speaks to what I've always viewed as one of the fundamental differentiators in yacht versus aircraft finance is in aircraft finance, there's a much greater focus on utilization and residual value data. And I guess the real question would be, if that's somehow applied to the yacht market, if that would increase the availability of yacht finance to the extent that there's a dearth of it. But I mean, and that's another question: is there a dearth of availability of yacht finance for owners that are seeking it at different categories? Because as far as the jet market is concerned, almost all of my clients are multi-billionaires. I've never had less financed aircraft in my career than I do at this moment. It's because they don't need the money, and it's complicated to execute. And so what I always tell the bankers is, hold tight, because it's the greatest pipeline of unfinanced aircraft in history. But the rates are a bit too high at the moment.
Just one thing I think really interesting about the aircraft programs or the engine programs is actually the aviation industry is much more selling razor blades than selling razors. An aircraft engine manufacturer and a helicopter manufacturer will make so much more money over the lifetime of the aircraft it's in service than they will from selling it originally. So if you can get a brand new aircraft engine on a business jet, if you could get hold of one, that's actually worth more parted out than it would be the cost you'd buy it from a manufacturer. Yeah. And if you look at Bombardier, by 2030, Bombardier is expecting half of all their revenue to come from servicing aircraft, not from selling new ones.
And by the way, we have a completely independent provider in the aviation market that does JSSI, does quite well for itself as a non-OEM provider of aircraft engine programs and APUs, and other.
And if you have airplanes in 15, 20 years old, it's not really that old in our world. But if you take a 20-year-old long-range aircraft, the real value is the engines. So if you have an airplane that really is on the engine programs, that's the value of the airplane. If you don't have programs, it's really, you're the last person to own that airplane for sure, and it's going to the scrap after that.
Sorry, Stefan.
I think it all goes into the question customization versus standardization or commoditization, as you said before, Paul, right? And the question is, I mean, of course, if a product is more commoditized, you get more access to financing. The question is, do you really want as an industry to become more commoditized? Because the beauty of yachting is also that the boats are customized. So if we go towards aviation, then you have basically 7 shipyards left, and they all build yachts that look all the same, right? That might help for chartering, but in the long run, you get more financing, but it doesn't really help the industry as a whole, right?
But on airplanes, they also have programs called tip to tail. So it's sort of like an extended warranty on the whole airplane. I don't know if you have anything like that on yachts, but basically anything that goes wrong with the airplane, if you're under this program, is paid for. It's expensive, but the CFOs of companies like them because they don't have to worry about big surprises.
I think it will never become commoditized because boats are floating homes and where you spend weeks at a time, and the jets are phenomenal, but they just go from A to B. And for anybody who's fortunate enough to flown private, it's really upsetting going back to EasyJet. Usually when they've just dropped you off. So like, hey, empty legs, not so much now, but used to be a thing. I'm still waiting for the empty yacht charter for a week, which hasn't happened. But the personality thing is the other thing, because I think the topic was what are the differences and what can the yacht market learn from the jets, right? And the biggest thing when people ask me what the difference is the personalities. So from a yacht if you run a jet company and you're trying to find more owners for jets, where do you look? You look in the yacht industry, because I bet you everybody in this room speaks to the principal on a fairly routine basis. It's very rare that you deal exclusively with a CFO, CEO, or a professional department or family office. You might a lot of the time, but the principal will always show up at some point and have some involvement because they really care. With the jets, yeah, we speak to the principals, but more often than not, it'll be a flight department, or it'll be a family office, or it'll be a CFO. It's just a business tool. So it's a business tool that gets used by the owners and the family, admittedly, but it's an A to B job. And I think the big difference between the two industries is the personalities and how you deal with them and who picks up the phone to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about what you're saying. 70% of the passengers on corporate jets are middle management, and about 20% are C-suite. So, I don't know, we actually do have a lot more success with dealing with the principals, but there are a lot of our bigger competitors that they do really deal with the Fortune 1000 companies, and that's their bread and butter. So, people do have their niches that they work under and their followings, but, for sure, if we could deal with the principal, with the decision maker, we have a better chance of, two things. One, a better chance of getting a deal done, but also a better chance of them trying to negotiate our fee.
Paul, one of the best in pets has asked a question. Can aviation learn from yachting with standard legal contracts and addendums and commission splits between buyers and sellers broker?
So, I mean, there have been attempts at doing so through. We're not quite the Wild West. We do have some industry associations like IATA, International Aircraft Dealers Association, others that have tried to do.
But
so.
nowhere near as powerful as I would say as the yachting association.
Absolutely, and I think that's a function of two things really. A lot of our forms of contracts, both in trading and financing, originated from commercial aviation, and that's a multi-trillion-dollar a year market to a somewhat similar degree as I would imagine commercial shipping to yachting, but much more. We're still flying close to the gravitational pull of commercial aviation a lot, and a lot of the transactions are still quite bespoke because one of the key drivers in every aircraft deal that I work for any of my clients, is tax structuring, taking advantage of accounting efficiencies. And yes, I'm sure that's also the case in yachts. But for that reason, the way that our assets are differentiated between the ownership and operating structure with a larger choice of registries than your sort of usual suspects, and kind of how that interplays with the owners or other holdings structures, that leads itself to more bespoke structures. But again, for a large part, they tend to look similar.
That's a lawyer's answer, getting charged by the hour. The answer, Ian, is yes.
Yeah.
And don't clap him.
Yeah.
Steve, the other thing you would like the jet market to learn is if you identify a client and you take them to one of the OEMs, what do they give you?
Maybe a cup of coffee, but no, actually, not very few of the OEMs will pay a fee to a broker for bringing a client. But definitely, there's the one-off situation, but normally the OEMs does not pay a broker to bring. So you have to have the control of the relationship with your client, representing them. And actually with the OEMs, sometimes, you have a love-hate relationship with the OEMs because, if you go to the OEM with a client, they know that you're going to do a deal with them. The problem is when you're representing a client and you're getting paid by them, they're not going to get the deal that they'd like because you know all the things you can get away with. So sometimes we don't want to ruin our relationship with the OEM. So what we will do is actually stay behind the curtain, and we will tell the customer, go say this, go ask for this, go do this, or use a lawyer to, help us negotiate some of that stuff, because obviously the OEMs don't want to, don't want us raining on their parade.
Well, I'm glad lawyers can be helpful in that sense. But I can say I do fairly regularly at least a couple dozen new aircraft a year with large cabin aircraft. Most of those I will take directly to the OEMs myself without a broker. And part of that is that we have a different relationship with the OEMs than maybe lawyers in the yacht space do. So I routinely will negotiate pricing, commercial terms, all of it. So that's, maybe that's something the yacht market can learn as well.
Stefan,
need a broker.
You see the contracts, there's a massive difference between signing an aircraft buying a new aircraft from an OEM and a new build contract, isn't there?
Yeah, again, you buy a new aircraft, which is already standardized. You can change a little bit the layout of the seats, you want a bed, want a shower, I heard now a hammam in the plane as well. But at the end of the day,
really good for corrosion.
You get basically a finished product, right? Whereas in the yachting world, depends what you buy. Do you buy semi-custom, full custom? You go there and you plan a full project, right, with the shipyard. So it's a much, much different level of detail that goes into the planning, and also the time the clients spend with the shipyards themselves.
You can go and buy a new Gulfstream for 80 million, and it'll be 3 pages long as a contract, and you'll negotiate 3 sentences, and that's it. And you sign it, and you wait 2 years, 18 months, and you get a delivery.
James, do you think there's less litigation on the jet side? I'm talking about contractual litigation, not other.
You are talking about contractual litigation.
Yeah, I'm not talking about.
The litigation on the jets is much more complicated. There's every bit as much, and it's I don't know which does more. I think they're both markets with high value assets. It's much less emotional and emotive. So because you're dealing with a CFO a lot, if you have a dispute, it's whether it's cost effective to go into litigation or not. There's much less of the am I allowed to say screw you on stage? It's much less screw you, I'll come at you, I'm a big guy, and I'll sue you. It's much more value driven and whether it makes sense commercially. But we've had litigation where I'm trying to think of the tolerances now, but going back to the inspection phase, you go in and there's corrosion on a part of the aircraft, and it's 8 millimeters or something, and you end up negotiating over $6 million for 8 millimeters of corrosion, and it's very technical when you do.
Paul, you're very argumentative, but you hate litigation, don't you? And you've got a pet project.
Yeah, it's just a small thing called the Hague Court of Arbitration for Aviation, which I was the founder of and outgoing chair of. It's since we launched 3 years ago, we've been written into billions of dollars of contract. We've had dozens of cases now referred to us, and I can tell you without breaching confidences, the biggest area for us first was private aviation. That's where the cases came from, and which is off-ramping litigation towards arbitration, even in instances where arbitration wasn't written into the contract in the first place. My actual pet project, which is kind of on a much smaller scale, is mediation. Because to James's point, we're dealing with principles. To Al's question about contract disputes, we're dealing between principles, right? And a lot of times there is a tendency to sort of go to war, but mediation can resolve most of the problems that we deal with in a routine manner in private aviation before things have gone sort of horrifically wrong. And I know from some of the attorneys in the room that's arbitration and mediation is a bigger focus in the yacht world than aviation.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. Steve, is there a big difference between selling a helicopter and a jet?
Not the bigger helicopters, sort of twin turbine helicopters, which are $5 to $15 million. No, there's not any difference.
The other big difference, Heli, is you can sell it for. You can adapt possibly. You can take a VIP, turn it into an oil and gas one.
Yeah, but there's just so many more parts that are time limited and cycle limited on a helicopter, so it's a little more complicated to price a helicopter than it is for an airplane.
Because unlike yachts where we close in international waters a lot, we don't do that with aircraft, so we don't close in international airspace. It used to be done, and then there was a case that if you ask a lawyer, they'll know the name of it. Can't remember.
Mahan Air.
Whatever.
Blue Sky versus Mahan.
Yes, Blue Sky, thank you very much. And that all ended. So now...
Which was an Iranian airline, but let's stay away from that.
Great topic.
That's not the case.
But now we go to tax-neutral locations for closings. Typically around here, it's always Guernsey. And what I was going to say, the reason I raise that is it's actually with small helicopters, at least, it's difficult to get to a tax-neutral location to close than a jet, because you whiz off, you come back an hour later, everything's done. Small helicopter has to bounce all the way there, depending on where it is. If it's in Germany, bouncing to Guernsey is quite difficult. And that's one of the differences that we see between helicopters and jets. Oh, can I do one other thing that I think actually would be super useful for yachts? It's nice to think of things on the spot, on stage. Customs warehousing. So we will close aircraft deals a lot on the ground in the UK, for example, with helicopters, by throwing a virtual customs warehouse over the top of it. And it means it's tax neutral, and as long as you export the aircraft and leave within a certain time, you don't trigger a VAT liability when you close in the UK. And we don't do that in yachts, probably because we can just go 12 miles offshore and then come back, and it's pretty easy and perhaps even cheaper than a customs warehouse. But actually, customs warehousing, particularly when yachts are in a shipyard, for example, and can't go offshore, a customs warehouse solution would be pretty useful for yachts.
The key thing is it has to be virtual, because if you're actually building a warehouse, that takes. Any questions or comments?
Sorry, I can't let one thing go. It wasn't the Blue Sky case. The Blue Sky case was about the attachment and perfection of mortgages. I hate you both. But anyway, one thing I'll say, because I think James had tremendous value with his last comment, and I'll try to give you something as well. But I do think, just flipping it around, one thing that the yacht market, from what I've learned the past few days, does very well that we would do better with, three things. Charter optimization. I think we just need to do it much better and wider in private aviation, which you all do great. Experiential marketing and that whole method of selling the industry, which the gentleman did a great job at speaking about yesterday. And then finally, I would say the build experience. When it comes to new aircraft versus new yachts, where, again, I hate to use the C word, commoditized, but, to James's point, sign a contract, please make more than 3 comments, and then here's your jet. There's a bit of completions, but it's not as intimate as it is with yachts. Obviously, we're talking about much different volumes and prices, but those are three things you all do incredibly well that I've picked up the past couple of days.
Actually, one other, if we've got no questions, Steve, one of the other big differences is pilots, like captains, are massively influential on the new sale. But pilots usually tend to be type rated to a certain aircraft and very loyal for that manufacturer, don't they?
Yeah, they're loyal because they're used to flying a certain manufacturer, and they like to stay in that manufacturer. And probably, I'd say 50 to 70% of the time, if a company is moving from one airplane to another, the pilot is very influential with what airplane they should be buying. So the principal might get involved. We're lucky with our showroom that we do get more face-to-face people. We can sort of break in there a little bit and get them educated on some other alternatives. But the pilots do have a very big influence, and sometimes they're influenced by the OEMs more than others.
Okay, Andrew, you all recognize the value of escrow agents. We can do yes, no answers.
Yes.
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 But we also have, I don't know if you have in yachts, but we have law firms that do escrow. I don't know if you do. Some law firms do escrow. I don't.
Yeah. Okay, final, really quickly. What would you like to take from the yacht market into the jet market?
The broker's commission rate.
7, what do you think the jet market should learn?
Client experience, I think.
James?
Customs warehousing.
Virtual customization.
Virtual customs warehousing. Don't start building stuff.
The crowd. You know, I go to the jet conferences, and I've been sitting in the back of the room most of the past 2 days. It's a different crowd. It's a different level of discourse and engagement. And
You are so playing to the
the
audience.
fact that I don't care. No, I don't need to. But the fact that you're all still in the room, it's almost the end of the day on the second day, and you're here and respectful questions. Like it's a different crowd, and I'll leave it at that. And not.
Paul's basically been banned from most of the jet conferences, so because he's also wrong, because Blue Sky versus Mahan was about an excitus of English law mortgages. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.